Hello, everybody. This is Empowering Democracy. I'm your host, Joe Firestone. And tonight we have another Dump the Corruption show. Our topic is What If, by part one. And the objective of this game that we're about to play is to go over a number of pieces of news and try to imagine whether we would be getting that news if the Dump the Corruption movement had existed in 2000 and was strong in 2020 and in 2022 in those two election cycles. Hey, Brandy, how are you doing? Very nice to see you here so early. So, I'm going to start with a piece on Social Security and then move through, a number of pieces, hopefully fairly quickly, to try to illustrate. Oh, I'm sorry to hear that, Brandy. There are good reasons, to be depressed, though. Uh, the absolute horror in Palestine is just incredible, and the stupidity and the evil of U.S. foreign policy in that area. They seem to be just writing the Israelis a blank check. It's just awful. But I don't want to be diverted from the topic, of tonight. So I'm going to present the first of these articles and then ask the question of whether we'd be grappling with this if we'd had a Dump the Corruption movement in 2000 and in 2022. So this is from Common Dreams. I think all the articles for tonight are from Common Dreams. And here are people gathering at a rally supporting Social Security. This photo was by Dave Kotinsky at Getty Images and was taken from MoveOn. With the shutdown averted, is Social Security safe? The answer is nope. More tax giveaways to the rich simply mean less revenue, higher deficits, and more justification for taking a meat cleaver to programs that serve and protect ordinary Americans. This one is by James Roosevelt Jr., Henry Scott Wallace, June Hopkins, Tomlin Perkins, I guess that last name is Coggeshall. These seem to be relatives. James Roosevelt, of course, is a relative of the Roosevelts, either grandson or great-grandson. Henry Scott Wallace is probably a Henry Wallace relative. But June Hopkins is, I'm sure, a descendant of Harry Hopkins. And Tomlin Perkins Coggeshall is evidently a descendant of Francis Perkins, the first Secretary of Labor in the Roosevelt administration. This was written October 23rd, 2023. So let's talk Social Security. The government shutdown was averted temporarily, so that's a good thing, right? Trump is promising not to touch it. Benefits are not threatened, right? Wrong. Social Security has a bullseye on its back. As descendants of the New Deal leaders who created it, yeah, that's it. We recognize the warning signs and need to shout the alarm. The right-wing hardliners who fired House Speaker Kevin McCarthy with no replacement anywhere in sight, by the way, as there was an update today, one Mike Johnson proved to be the right winger that was acceptable to all the right wingers in the Republican Party. And he was elected the Speaker with 220 votes. Some of the Democrats never got there to vote. So Hakeem Jeffries came out in the end with 209 rather than 212 votes. But there was a clear majority for Mike Johnson, who was best known, as an evangelical Christian. Now that is not a promising identity for the crisis in Israel-Palestine, because of course the evangelical Christians, too many of them, have this idea that the end times, are coming, and that, of course, for the end times to really be here, we have to have a situation where the Jews have control of Israel from the river to the sea. And so that group is in very strong support of the right-wing Israelis. And they do a lot to fund the right wing of Israelis. And now one of them is the Speaker of the House, the second in line, to the presidency. If you consider the first in line to be the vice president, the second in line is the Speaker of the House. I don't know how long he will remain the Speaker of the House, but it's very disturbing to have a Speaker of the House who's a believer in the end times. Anyway, getting back to the piece. The right-wing hardliners who fired House Speaker Kevin McCarthy with no replacement anywhere in sight are determined to balance the budget by reducing spending. The word, quote, by revenues, unquote, is an obscenity to them. And defense spending is sacred and untouchable. So I have to state here right away that these descendants, of the New Dealers are more conservative than the New Dealers were when it comes to public finances. They believe that the only way that the federal government is able to get any money is through revenues and through borrowing. I mean, obviously, this paragraph states how important they think, that revenues are. So these descendants of the New Dealers have never heard, of MMT. So, going on. But even if they completely eliminated every single non-defense discretionary program, from food stamps to the FBI to border protection, it wouldn't be enough. It would add up to about $900 billion, or about 15% of total federal spending, which would fall far short of balancing the budget. So the deficit cutting zeal must inevitably turn to what is called mandatory spending, most prominently the largest government program of all, Social Security. Republican presidential candidates are increasingly emboldened to touch this deadly, quote, third rail, unquote, of American politics. Nikki Haley, the other candidates, were promising not to touch Social Security. Ron DeSantis wants to, quote, revamp it, unquote. Mike Pence wants to privatize it, turning it over to Wall Street and adding trillions to the national debt to replace the New Deal with a, quote, a better deal, unquote. Okay. But by the way, Warren Mosler long ago showed uh, okay, in the seven deadly innocent frauds book that uh, turning Social Security over to Wall Street would not constitute a better deal, okay, at all. That the way we run Social Security now is a better deal than Wall Street would ever be able, okay, to deliver. And although former President Donald Trump now swears he would never harm a hair on Social Security's head, his history renders such assurances hollow. He's previously suggested his second Trump term would mean cuts to Social Security and Medicare. Let's not forget that his hugest unachieved social policy goal at the end of his presidency was the complete termination of Social Security's principal funding source, the payroll tax. Former Speaker McCarthy, I guess I got to comment on that, folks, okay, as well. The complete termination of Social Security's principal funding source is not really Social Security's principal funding source, except, okay, in a manner of speaking, because as Stephanie Kelton showed long ago in her paper of 1998, tax revenues, okay, and the proceeds from debt instruments do not finance government spending. The reason why they do not is very, very simple, but it's technical. In the context, okay, of how deposits of tax revenue and bond proceeds, okay, are settled, those dollars, the debt instrument dollars, and the tax dollars are destroyed in the process of settlement. And the Federal Reserve creates entirely new dollars, which are then used by the Treasury Department to spend. So what actually pays for federal spending is congressional appropriations and the ability of the Federal Reserve to create reserves out of thin air and to top off the Treasury Department's spending account. Going on, former Speaker McCarthy proposes a national commission to examine ways to cut Social Security. Remember the Fiscal Commission, okay, in Obama's time, the Fiscal Commission of 2000, okay, and 10. That was a national commission to examine ways to cut Social Security either. But the commission could never get agreement. The 17 members of the commission, okay, could never get agreement. They were supposed to get agreement, I believe. I'm sorry, there were 18 members of that commission. They were supposed to get agreement by 14-4 to actually get Congress to act, okay, on an up or down vote. And fortunately for the rest of us, okay, the vote they took was only something like 11-7 or 12-6. So they failed to issue, a report that had the necessary authority to get Congress to act, and that was very, very good. So Speaker McCarthy, not satisfied with what happened in 2010, is basically proposing the same thing: a national commission to examine ways to cut Social Security. The 175 members of the House Republican Study Committee have released their proposed budget for fiscal 2024, which would cut benefits by 1/3, essentially transforming Social Security from an earned insurance benefit into a subsistence level type, of welfare benefits. That's going to be touching the third rail. And the more that people are aware that is what the Republicans intend to do, the less likely it is, of course, that that is going to get through Congress. Previous threats have included plans to sunset all mandatory spending every 5 years. That one was a brainchild of Senate GOP campaign chair Rick Scott, the criminal who was never convicted, or even every single year proposed by Wisconsin Senator Ron Johnson, a notorious right-winger in the Senate. It's true that Social Security will start having solvency problems by 2034, according to the Social Security Administration. No, that is not true. As long as Congress appropriates the money for Social Security every year, Social Security will not have any solvency problems. The reason why the Social Security Administration claims that it will start having solvency problems is because there's a little fiction in the federal government. That fiction is the Social Security account, which is not a bank account, but just an accounting record of what the Treasury Department owes to Social Security. That's all it is. It's not a bank account. It's not something that's going to run out of money. What will happen is that the keepers of that account will start to reduce it, to such a degree that after 2034, if nothing is done, but what kinds of things could be done? Well, Congress could simply decide to guarantee the Social Security appropriation each year on a continuing basis, to guarantee that it will pay full benefits that are owed, to retirees every year into the future, without fail. If that is placed inside of the law, there will be no, quote, solvency problem, unquote. There is now no solvency problem when it actually comes to money. The federal government is not insolvent. There are laws and constitutional amendments which say that it cannot be insolvent. Though, of course, the Republicans are looking to disobey these laws. But there are no voluntary, there are no involuntary solvency problems that the federal government has. Of course, the Republicans can voluntarily create solvency problems because when they freeze the federal spending, or when they decide they're not going to extend, the debt limit or something like that, they can cause the Treasury Department funding to run out of actual reserve dollars. So the Republicans can voluntarily default and create solvency problems. but there are no involuntary solvency problems involved. There are only the actions of irresponsible members of Congress. Going on. It's true that Social Security will start having solvency problems by 2034, according to the Social Security Administration, which is involved in the same fantasy, with retirees taking out more than current workers are putting in. That still would not make Social Security insolvent, because there's enough money coming in that, according to forecast, it will pay up to, I think, 2/3 of benefits or 3/4 of benefits as far as the eye can see. So it's only something like 1/4 of benefits, which is very interesting, of course, because even though 1/4 of benefits would be guaranteed by current law forever, what the Republicans want to do is to cut Social Security by 1/3. So if even in the worst case it would be cut by 1/4, why do they want to cut it by 1/3? Because they're the Republicans and they want to screw people. That's what it is. That's what it comes down to. To this, there are obviously only two solutions: cutting payout or increasing revenues. No, there are other solutions. You could resort to overt congressional financing. That would require the congressional appropriation to pay for Social Security to cause the Federal Reserve to immediately place the necessary reserves in the Treasury spending account at the start of every year. That's one thing you could do: overt congressional financing. You also could mint a $100 trillion platinum coin. And then that would give the Treasury Department sufficient funds to pay out full benefits for Social Security as far as the eye can see. Going on with the article, the Republicans in their budget acknowledge this, but they absolutely reject any whiff of the latter. And there's a link there here at 87 to 88. They do absolutely reject any whiff, but the point is these descendants of the New Deal are rejecting any whiff of the federal government creating money, which is empowered by the Constitution to do. Instead of creating money, what they want to do is to either tax more, or borrow more. For a sustainable Social Security, the most popular government program in America taking revenues off the table is two things: one, insanity, and two, unshakable Republican orthodoxy. As Oliver Wendell Holmes counseled, revenues, i.e. taxes, are the price we pay for civilized society, quote unquote. And to fund our civilization, it's obvious that those with the most money should pay their fair share. Obviously, it's not obvious to those Republicans, guys. So Americans are shocked that billionaires like Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk can get away with paying zero in federal taxes.
Hello.
Hello, Dee. How are you?
All right. It's good to see the gang here.
Yes, there is.
Brandy and Steve.
Yeah, that is good.
Yes.
Okay, I'm in the middle of reading a piece on Social Security by the descendants of the New Dealers, who are absolutely antediluvian in their understanding of how federal funding takes place. But anyway, let's continue on with this article. Let's not forget that during FDR's New Deal, which rescued the nation from the Great Depression and grew the great American middle class as never before, the tax rate on the richest Americans was 90%, up from 25% under previous Republican administrations, which produced nothing but a do-nothing government, the Gilded Age, and the Depression. Which is true, except for the fact that, if I'm not mistaken, at one time during the Second World War, the tax rate on the richest Americans actually rose to 94%. And that was Franklin Roosevelt actually compromising, because he wanted to raise the tax rate on the richest Americans to 100%, but he was dissuaded from doing that by some of the relative conservatives in his New Deal administration. So let's make the rich pay more of their fair share of Social Security. Let's start with eliminating the cap on earnings that is subject to the payroll tax. Currently, the earnings are $160,200, are totally exempt from payroll taxes. Earnings over $160,200 are totally exempt from payroll taxes. This is, of course, true, and it would be wonderful to tax them more. I'm all for taxing them more, but I also have to say we don't need their money to fund Social Security. We need their money because their money is a threat to our democracy. That means the CEO making 10 million stops paying the 6.2% payroll tax after the first week of the year, while his janitor pays 6.2% for the entire year. That's an outrageous affront to ordinary working people throughout the United States. I completely agree with that. It's an outrageous affront. It's completely unfair, completely unprogressive, completely unequal. The payroll tax should be a progressive tax. It shouldn't even be a flat tax for the entire year. It should simply be a progressive tax. In fact, I'll go so far as to say there shouldn't be any Social Security tax. There should just be a program to fund Social Security forever through the use of overt congressional financing or platinum coins. Moreover, Social Security should be expanded by doubling the payouts for Social Security so that those payouts are comparable to European payouts to retired people, but from the government. The United States has the worst public retirement program in the developed world right now. And that's been true for years. Democrats in Congress are brimming with proposals to guarantee Social Security solvency for generations without cutting benefits one iota. Nearly 200 House Democrats recently introduced a bill called Social Security 2100, a sacred trust would extend solvency for more than 40 years. But that's all. It extends it for only 40 years. If you used platinum coins or overt congressional financing, it would be extended forever. So why extend it for only 40 years? Because Democrats are too dumb to read the deficit myth and understand it. It would fund this, or my book on platinum coins, it would fund this by imposing the 6.2% payroll tax on earned income above $400,000. Okay, I've read enough of this. I've got to go on to other things, even though I could have fun, reading this whole thing forever. But I'm not going to do this. I'm going to end this at this point. And what I'm going to point out for you is that the issue raised in this article would never be an issue if the Dump the Corruption campaign had existed and was powerful in 2020 and 2022. And the reason why is because all the Republicans want to cut Social Security and other welfare programs because they are bought by big money. Every one of them is taking big money. And if the Dump the Corruption rule were in effect and voters were voting according to that rule, every Republican would be swept out of the House, would have been swept out of the House in 2020. And only people who were not taking money would have been elected in their place. And people who were not taking money would never cut Social Security, because without the big money to back the representatives, if any representatives try to support something like that, their voters would have their heads on a silver platter in the first election following that. And voters voting according to Dump the Corruption would know that they could do that, okay, in any given election, and there would be no money people would be taking to stop that. So that issue would never even have arisen. Never even have arisen if Dump the Corruption had swept all of the Republicans and all the Democrats out of House 2, because all the Democrats were taking big money too, as our previous programs have shown. So both parties would have been swept out. Only third-party candidates not taking big money would have gotten in. And last I looked, the Green Party is not looking to cut Social Security. It is looking to expand Social Security. I think that's right, Dee, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
Okay, let's move to the second of these articles. That is Bernie Sanders. Here's Bernie. Picture of Bernie, okay, Common Dreams. Sanders demands probe of push to give company patent for publicly funded cancer treatment. Senate Health Committee chair noted that quote, the apparent abuse of the system is so egregious that it has been characterized as a, quote, how to become a billionaire program run by the National Institutes of Health, by NIH, in other words. This one's by Jessica Corbett, October 23rd, 2023. U.S. Senator Bernie Sanders on Monday called for an inspector general investigation into an effort to grant a company tied to an ex-government employee an exclusive patent license for a cancer treatment produced with public sources, as revealed with public resources, as revealed last week by the American Prospect magazine. Sanders, independent of Vermont, who chairs the Senate Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions Health Committee, demanded a probe of the National Institutes of Health patent proposal in a letter to Christy Grimm, Inspector General of the U.S. Department of Human Services. I'm growing increasingly alarmed that not only has the NIH abdicated its authority to ensure that the new drugs it develops helps develop are reasonably priced, it may actually be exceeding its authority to grant essentially monopoly licenses to pharmaceutical companies that charge the American people by far the highest prices in the world for prescription drugs, unquote, Sanders wrote. And quote again, one particularly egregious example has recently been brought to my attention that I believe demands your immediate attention. What was brought to his attention was the article by Dave Dayen, I believe it is, at the Prospect. I believe he was the author, of that article. And this, of course, is the letter by Bernie Sanders. I'm not going to go through the letter. HTV, the human papilloma virus, can lead to 6 types of cancer and is responsible for virtually all cervical cancer, quote unquote. According to the National Cancer Institute, last month, NIH proposed granting Scarlet TCR a patent for a T-cell therapy for HPV, which has already gone through a phase 1 trial and has a phase 2 trial set to wrap up in 2025. The Prospect executive editor, Dave Dayen, spoke with James Love of Knowledge Ecology International, a group that tracks drug patent issues and is formally opposing the proposal for Kingston, New Jersey-based Scarlet TCR, which was incorporated in Delaware somewhat earlier this year, as Dayen detailed last week. After doing some digging, Love traced Scarlet TCR to a former senior investigator and research scholar for immunology with the National Cancer Institute division of the NIH named Christian Hinrichs, who now works at the Rutgers Cancer Institute of New Jersey. The Rutgers campus in New Brunswick is about 12 miles from Kingston, New Jersey, and the mascot of the university is the Scarlet Knight, which could explain Scarlet TCR, in other words, the name of the company. Hinrichs also disclosed a financial relationship with Scarlet TCR at a recent American Association for Cancer Research meeting. The extent of that relationship is unknown, while Love presumes that Hinrichs is either the creator of Scarlet TCR or one of its principal executives. The NIH would not confirm Hinrichs' role to Love. Why the hell not? And offered essentially no information about the company. The Prospect attempted to contact the NIH about Scarlet TCR and Hinrichs as well, and did not receive a response. Hinrichs also did not respond to a request for comment. Dayen also noted that Sanders' office did not respond when asked if the Scarlet TCR license would be an issue in congressional hearings, unquote. The reporting was published the same day that Sanders held a confirmation hearing for Dr. Monitor Bertagnoli, who currently leads the National Cancer Institute, but has been nominated by President Joe Biden to direct NIH. Sanders, who earlier this year held up nominations to pressure the administration to take more action on lowering drug prices, has scheduled a panel vote on Bertagnoli for Wednesday. That, of course, is today. So I presume there was a vote today. Sanders did not directly cite the Prospect in his letter to Grimm, but he wrote that, quote, the apparent abuse of the system by the NIH with respect to the exclusive patent license for this cancer therapy is so egregious that it has been characterized as How to Become a Millionaire program run by the NIH, unquote, which is a remark Love made today. So, I don't know whether that became an issue in the hearings or not, but what I do know is that there's going to be pressure on Sanders to confirm that particular appointment, but the big issue is, why does the NIH grant patents to private companies when the government has done the research work and, generally speaking, the development work on these drugs in the first place? My point here is that this whole issue is a hangover from the neoliberal period, when the NIH thought it was positive to do partnerships with private companies and almost everything And they thought, okay, that it was meritorious to make people who owned private companies very, very rich by allowing them to monopolize the fruits, okay, of the government research. We see this not only happening in this particular cancer cure, but with respect to Moderna's vaccines and Pfizer's vaccines. Those were based on government research also. Why did those two companies have exclusive rights to those vaccines? Why were they able to prevent the spread of the vaccines uh, um, 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 throughout the world? Now, don't get me wrong. In the long run, this may prove to be a good thing because the mRNA vaccines, when you look at them in terms of their long-term effects, increasing amount of research has shown that there are problems with these particular vaccines. So maybe it's good that the rest of the world did not actually have these vaccines. Actually, we had them, and we had one of the highest rates of death in the world in spite of the presence, okay, of the vaccines. But I'm not going to go into this particular issue too much. What I want to say is that the generalized issue that somehow the government is constrained to work with private companies to grant them these patents because public-private partnerships are desirable. The neoliberal idea of profits over people. This is not an idea which would survive in a dump the corruption type of environment. It's an idea that's going to disappear. It's an idea that representatives not beholden to big money are not going to tolerate for very long. We wouldn't be seeing this issue in 2023 if there had been successful dump the corruption campaigns in 2020 and 2022, because such campaigns would have sped the rejection, okay, of neoliberalism, which, though it now has been generally discredited from an intellectual point of view, and the intellectual battle has perhaps been run, still neoliberalism is very much alive in the practice of government, and we are seeing it here. And it's very much alive because the big money wants to see it continue to live so they can profit off of it. Dump the corruption movements would have gotten rid of that and will get rid of it if the dump the corruption movement is strong and operative by election time 2024. So feel free to break in with comments on this, Dee.
Well, it's just all about profit, and we see that human life has no value.
And we see, okay, that human life has no value or little value when compared to profits. It's kind of just like our foreign policy.
Exactly, the same thing. Human life has no value. I saw this article where they were looking at the stock market, the profits being made at bombing Gaza.
Yes, absolutely. Okay, let's move to another instance. We have here a piece, and this, of course, okay, is good news. It's called Net Neutrality, Save the Internet. What's the headline? The photo is demonstrators gathering outside of the American Enterprise Institute to protest the FCC's attack on net neutrality in 2017, when they got rid of net neutrality in 2017 because Donald Trump appointed Ajit Pai to chair the Federal Communications Commission in 2017. Of course, as this article fails to mention, he was originally appointed to the Federal Communications Commission in the first place in 2012 by, guess who, Barack Obama. Mr. Neoliberal himself. If there's anybody more neoliberal, than Obama, though, it's probably Ajit Pai. Anyway, going on. 30 plus groups relaunch grassroots campaign as the FCC moves to restore net neutrality. That's the good news. Quote, we know big cable is going to pull out all the stops in an attempt to water down or even block the rules, unquote, said one campaigner. Quote, that's why we're mobilizing the grassroots. Thank God they're doing it, because there's going to be a big fight over this. This is by Jessica Corbett, October 24th, 2023. That was yesterday. Following the Federal Communications Commission vote last week to start restoring FCC oversight of broadband and net neutrality rules rolled back under President Donald Trump, more than 30 groups relaunched the Battle for the Net campaign. And folks, this time we had better win. I'm sick and tired of these net companies suppressing our stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Quote, we are proud to relaunch Battle for the Net along with over 30 organizations representing millions of Americans, unquote, said Demand Progress Communications Director Maria Langholz in a statement. Quote, it is absolutely critical for the FCC to succeed in this process to restore net neutrality and Title II protections. Despite intense opposition from internet providers, broadband was previously treated as a public service under Title II of the Communications Act. However, in 2017, then FCC Chair, the aforementioned Ajit Pai, a former telecom industry lawyer appointed by Trump, but originally appointed by Obama, led an unpopular rollback of the policy. Now, I have to clarify, he wasn't made the chair by Obama, just a member of the FCC, but still, he had a vote. There were only 5 people there, and Obama gave him a vote, which he had between 2012 and 2017. He probably never would have been appointed chair by Trump, except for the fact that he had served on the Federal Communications Commission for 5 years. Anyway, he led an unpopular rollback of the policy. After the U.S. Senate last month finally confirmed Commissioner Ana Gomez to a long vacant FCC seat, the Republicans kept it vacant because they didn't want any regulation. Chair Jessica Rosenworcel, she announced her plan to try to revive the policy, that is net neutrality policy, which prevents providers from blocking legal content, throttling speeds, and creating fast lanes. Commissioner Jeffrey Starks joined the 2 women in supporting the restoration effort. Quote, we applaud the FCC for moving forward this proposal and especially commend Chair Rosenworcel's leadership on this issue, unquote, Langholz said Tuesday. Quote, in addition to the commission, we impel members of Congress to stand with their constituents by supporting Title II reclassification, unquote. And then there's a discussion of the groups that are now fighting this battle. Quotes from them. There's a campaign website, thebattleforthenet.com, identifies, quote, next steps, unquote, as FCC reinstatement of net neutrality and pressuring Congress to enshrine the policy, into law. Now, the point I want to make here, of course, it's great that this is happening. I'm all for it. I encourage this fight. I love this fight. But The point is, it might have occurred, a lot earlier, except for the fact, which is pointed out at the beginning, of this article. After the U.S. Senate last month finally confirmed Commissioner Ana Gomez to a long vacant FCC seat. Why was this finally confirmed? Why did it take so long to confirm, the appointment? Because, of course, the big money is controlling the Senate. And they wanted to delay the confirmation, of Ana Gomez for a long time. Until that happened, it wasn't possible for Rosenworcel to move ahead with her plans. She had to wait for that confirmation. But the senators, who were beholden to the big money, did not want to confirm that extra vote inside of the FCC, which would have made it possible to go back to a net neutrality situation. If we had had the Dump the Corruption campaign in 2020 and 2022, the events we're seeing now could have happened more quickly, a lot more quickly. So let us move on to the next illustration. The IEA, the International Energy Agency, has issued a report that makes clear the urgent need to, quote, rapidly replace and phase out all fossil fuels. The agency warned that while renewable energy use is surging, fossil fuel production worldwide remains, quote, far too high, unquote, to prevent catastrophic warming. This one is by Jake Johnson, October 24, 2023. The IEA warned Tuesday that governments aren't moving with nearly enough urgency to phase out fossil fuels, leaving the world on a perilous track toward 2.4 degrees Celsius of warming above pre-industrial levels by the end of the century. While the IEA's latest World Energy Outlook report celebrates, quote, the phenomenal rise of clean energy technologies such as solar, wind, electric cars, and heat pumps, unquote, it makes clear that the continued burning of oil, gas, and coal is undermining global renewable energy progress. Quote, as things stand, demand for fossil fuels is set to remain far too high to keep within reach the Paris Agreement goal of limiting the rise in average global temperatures to 1.5 degrees Celsius, the IEA said. Quote again, the cost of inaction could be enormous. Despite the impressive clean energy growth based on today's policy settings, global emissions would remain high enough to push up global average temperatures by around 2.4 degrees Celsius this century, well above the key threshold set out in the Paris Agreement. Now, the IEA is probably not sufficiently pessimistic, but that's really neither here nor there. The main point is we can't get real progress on the climate crisis here because so many representatives and especially those in leadership of the two congressional bodies, and of course the president himself, are all bought by fossil fuel interests. I know the president has done some moves towards trying to manage the crisis, the climate crisis. But all he's really doing is supporting the all resources energy strategy, including fossil fuels. He's promised that nothing will fundamentally change. So he cannot try to phase out the fossil fuel industry. He cannot get any legislation through Congress, to do that. And he himself is to some degree bought by the fossil fuel companies, because certainly the Democratic National Committee is bought by the fossil fuel companies. And the Republican legislators are bought by the fossil fuel companies. It's again big money making sure that certain policy changes cannot take place. Even though the climate emergency is an existential threat, that industry would rather see us all die than see their profits go away.
That's true.
It's profits over people rather than people over profits. It's neoliberalism, above all. It is greed, above all. If Dump the Corruption had been a huge movement in 2020, neither Biden nor Trump would have been elected in 2020. There would have been third-party candidates elected in 2020 who were not beholden to big money. Most probably, there would have been a Green Party candidate elected in 2020. And that candidate would have moved aggressively for a Green New Deal, far more aggressively than Joe Biden has moved. And that person, she or he, in the event, of course, it was Howie Hawkins, who was running for the Greens in 2020. But I don't know if that would have been the outcome if we were in a Dump the Corruption environment.
Yeah, he's too far to the right when it comes to the Green Party with stuff. He seems to want to go along with the Republicans on a lot of stuff. I mean, not Republicans, Democrats.
Right.
On a lot of stuff.
In certain areas. But the question is whether he would have been, the nominee of the Green Party in 2020 if there had been a Dump the Corruption campaign, that was very strong. But even if it had been that particular nominee, with respect to the Green New Deal types of programs, he was ready to fund $4.2 trillion per year over 10 years. Compared to Biden's, what has he funded so far? $500 billion? Howie Hawkins was prepared to do $4.2 trillion per year for 10 years. That's not enough. But of course, if he had started doing that and seen, that it wasn't enough, he would have done a lot more. Because say what you will about him,
right?
Howie Hawkins was serious about doing something about the climate crisis.
That's true.
And he might have been elected if a Dump the Corruption campaign had basically disqualified both Trump and Joe Biden. So, we all know we can't solve the climate crisis because of the role of big money, in politics. I think all of us has to have to recognize that that, okay, is the truth. And it's going to remain the truth unless we have a major dump the corruption movement that can get rid of the role of money in politics and allow us to elect people at the state level, at the local level, and at the federal level in both houses of Congress and at the level of the presidency, where every representative is not beholden to the energy interests, okay, in any way, and where none of the parties that are elected are beholden to the energy interests, okay, in any way. I think that is the truth of the matter. And whether we have, okay, a dump the corruption campaign that's strong in 2024 is actually an existential question, because the climate emergency is an existential question. And we can't manage the climate emergency without getting rid of the role of big money in politics. And the only practical way to do it at this point is to gin up the dump the corruption movement so it is big enough and strong enough to get those bought people out of Congress, both houses, and out of the presidency too. And then the president and the Congress can get the bought people out of the Supreme Court.
Mm-hmm.
Then it would be easy to get them out of the Supreme Court. Easy. So let's go to the final piece for tonight. And here we have another existential question. We're seeing it get more and more existential every day. Philippine soldiers take position on a beach during a joint exercise between Australian and Philippine troops at a naval base in San Antonio town, Zambales province. I guess that's in the Philippines, on August 25th, 2023. The title of the article is Why We Need to Disarm the Anti-China Discourse. Excuse me a second, folks. I got to take a couple of pills. From expanding military bases in the Philippines to building a fleet of AI drones to target China, militarists are creating conditions for a hot war, okay, in the Pacific. This piece is by Cal Holmes, okay, and Lawson Adams. It was published on October 21st, 2023 by Common Dreams. From racist tweets to rising hate crimes, the media's anti-China propaganda has created a climate of aggression. 2 weeks ago, a man drove a car into the Chinese consulate in San Francisco yelling, quote, "Where's the CCP?" unquote. That's the Chinese Communist Party, of course. Arab Americans have been targeted during the Persian Gulf War, the war on terror, and U.S.-backed atrocities in Palestine. It's no surprise that Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders are in the crosshairs of white supremacy as the U.S. targets China. Back in April, I guess this is supposed to say a Columbia University report or a Columbia University professor, but there's a missing word, found that 3 in 4 Chinese Americans said they'd suffered racial discrimination in the past 12 months. When the Trump administration launched the China Initiative to prosecute spies, the Department of Justice racially profiled Chinese Americans and Chinese nationals. Between 2018 and 2022, the number of Chinese researchers who dropped their affiliation with U.S. institutions jumped 23%. Boy, that is our loss. Let me tell you that. The Biden administration has ended the initiative, but the Department of Justice and the Congressional Anti-China Committee are still targeting political leaders in the Chinese community. As Biden continues the crackdowns of his predecessor, his administration is also escalating in the Asia-Pacific region, from expanding military bases in the Philippines, including one potential base in the works intended to join contingencies in Taiwan, to building a fleet of AI drones to target China. The militarists are creating conditions for a hot war in the Pacific. As the U.S. prepares for war, Forbes published an article on September 25th. The article was about an aircraft carrier, quote, kill chain, and its potential use in a war with China. I'm not sure I can even imagine what an aircraft carrier kill chain is. But going on. In February, CNN journalists accompanied a U.S. Navy jet that was approaching Chinese airspace. As a Chinese pilot warned the United States to keep a safe distance, an American soldier remarked, "It's another Friday afternoon in the South China Sea," unquote. Not only are we normalizing U.S. aggression, we're also relying on the military-industrial complex as an unbiased source. Pro-war propaganda is derailing China-U.S. ties, increasing anti-Asian hate, and hiding the realities of public opinion across the Pacific. After launching the AUKUS, that's AUKUS, the military pact between Britain and Australia in 2021, as well as stiff export controls designed to limit China's economy last year, the U.S. began 2023 with what appeared to be an olive branch. Secretary of State Tony Blinken was scheduled to visit China in February. Then came the, quote, spy balloon, unquote. Chinese balloon was blown off course and eventually shot down by the U.S. military. The Wall Street Journal and NBC uncritically printed and broadcast statements from U.S. Air Force Brigadier General Pat Ryder about the balloon's surveillance capabilities. On February 8th, citing three unarmed officials, the New York Times said, quote, American intelligence agencies have assessed that China's spy balloon program is part of global surveillance, unquote. The same story mentions the U.S. State Department's briefings to foreign officials that were, quote, designed to show that the balloons are equipped for intelligence gathering, that the Chinese military has been carrying out this collection for years, targeting, among other sites, the territories of Japan, Taiwan, India, and the Philippines, unquote. On April 3rd, the BBC and CNN published conflicting stories on the balloon that cited anonymous officials but contained inconsistencies about its ability to take pictures. It wasn't until June 29th that Ryder admitted no data had been transmitted. In September, then chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Mark Milley, told CBS the balloon wasn't even spying. This matched China's statements about the balloon, as well as that, of American meteorologists. But the damage was done. Tony Blinken had postponed his trip to China. He eventually went in June after a trip to Papua New Guinea, where its student protesters rejected his plans to militarize their country under a security pact. On May 26th, Blinken made a speech referring to China as a, quote, long-term challenge, unquote. Politico went further, publishing a piece on May 26th called, quote, Blinken calls China, quote, most serious long-term, unquote, threat to world order, unquote. With the same day USA Today article also taking a liberty of using challenge and threat interchangeably. A Princeton University study found Americans who perceive China as a threat were more likely to stereotype Chinese people as untrustworthy and immoral. Intelligence leaks about a China threat combined with the age-old yellow peril syndrome have allowed for incessant xenophobia to dominate our politics. In May 2020, Trump told a scared country with 1 million recorded COVID cases and almost 100,000 dead that the pandemic was China's fault. So again, our leaders cited undisclosed intelligence. For its part, CNN showed images of wet markets after the Wall Street Journal published an op-ed by Walter Russell Mead called, quote, China's the real sick man of Asia, unquote. A year later, Politico eventually acknowledged Trump cherry-picked intelligence to support his claim, but the Biden administration ended up also seeking to investigate the lab leak theory, and the media went along with it. For the Wall Street Journal, pro-Iraq war propagandist Michael Gordon co-authored an article claiming that 3 researchers from China's Wuhan Institute of Virology became sick enough in November 2019 that they sought hospital care, unquote. An anonymous source said, quote, the information that we had coming from the various sources was of exquisite quality, unquote. But the source admits it's not known why researchers were sick. Duh. The article relies on the conservative Hudson Institute senior fellow David Asher's testimony and the fact China has not shared the medical records of citizens without potential COVID-19 symptoms. It is even admitted that several other unnamed U.S. officials find the Trump-era intelligence to be exactly what it is, circumstantial. 1 year earlier, during the 2020 Democratic presidential primaries moderated by CNN, Dana Bash asked Bernie Sanders, quote, what consequences should China face for its role in its global crisis, unquote. She asked the question by referencing how Wuhan's authorities silenced Dr. Wenli Yang, but failed to mention China's People's Supreme Court condemned the city's police for doing so. She also didn't acknowledge how Wuhan Institute of Virology's Shi Zhengli revealed in July 2020 that all the staff and students in her lab tested negative for COVID-19. She even shared her research with American scientists. Georgetown University COVID-19 origin specialist Daniel Lucy welcomed Shi's transparency. Quote, there are a lot of new facts I wasn't aware of. It's very exciting to hear this directly from her, unquote. But from the Page Act of 1875, which stereotyped Chinese as disease carriers, to job discrimination during the pandemic, it is Asian Americans who ultimately pay the price for the media's irresponsibility and participation in medical racism. They are already among the casualties of the new Cold War, but that war not only threatens residents of the U.S., but the entire planet too. Profit, not principle. This summer, the U.S. armed Taiwan under the Foreign Military Transfer Program reserved for sovereign states only. And yet, they armed Taiwan. They didn't have the authority to arm Taiwan. According to the State Department website, Taiwan is a province of China, recognized as such by the Department of State. The article says, of course, this violates the One China policy, which holds that both sides of the Taiwan Strait acknowledge that there is one China. So, why didn't Congress stop this spending under the Foreign Military Transfer Program? The federal government, the executive branch, didn't have the authority to transfer anything to Taiwan. What's wrong with this Congress? For that matter, what's wrong with the executive branch? Why are they trying to manufacture a war with China? Biden is also trying to include Taiwan weapons funding in a supplemental request to Congress. Yeah, we just heard about that. $60 billion request. Was it 60 billion? Something like, or was it 100 billion? I forget. Maybe it was 60 billion for Ukraine, maybe 10 billion for Israel, and 30 billion for Taiwan. Isn't that what it was? I forget. It was just recent. Weapon sales to Taiwan go back to the 1979 Taiwan Relations Act, as well as Reagan administration's assurances that the U.S. will keep sending weapons but not play any mediation role between Taipei and Beijing. In 1996, a military standoff between the U.S. and China erupted in the Taiwan Strait, followed by an increasing flow of lethal weaponry up to the present. New York Times published a story on September 18th mentioning former House Speaker Nancy Pelosi's visit to Taiwan, which it says was, quote, a show of support for the island. Never mind that the majority of Taiwan residents surveyed by the Brookings Institution, it says Brookings Institute here, but Brookings is an institution, it's not an institute, felt her visit was detrimental to their security. The media also often ignores voices from Taiwan who don't want war, favor reunification, or reject attempts to delete Chinese history in their textbooks. I guess, okay, I have to point out here that the Kuomintang Party favors, is favoring reunification with China. The Kuomintang Party is expected to win the elections of 2024 in Taiwan and to move towards reunification. But we never hear about that in our mainstream press, okay, in our media, okay, our mainstream media. We hear about it, of course, okay, in alternative media all the time. But we don't hear about that likelihood happening from the Washington Post, okay, or the New York Times, or the Wall Street Journal, or any of the other organs that want to pretend that Taiwan is independent. Still, Fox News continues to give a platform to lawmakers like Representative Young Kim, who wrote a piece on September 20th advocating for more military patrols in the South China Sea, which of course would bring us into direct conflict with China. On October 17th, the Washington Post published a story about the Pentagon releasing footage of Chinese aircraft intercepting U.S. warplanes over the last 2 years. The story does not share the context of U.S. expansionism or how multiple secretaries of defense have threatened Beijing over its disputed maritime borders. Microsoft is even getting in on the action with articles from CNN and Reuters last month, uncritically sharing the software company's claims that China is using AI to interfere in our elections, despite no evidence shared with the voting public. It demonstrates how war profiteers are edging us closer to a conflict, from sending the Patriot weapon system to Taiwan to practicing attacks with F 22 Raptors in the occupied um, but northern Marianas Islands. Lockheed Martin is raking in lucrative contracts while residents of the region fear an outbreak of war. RTX supplies Israel's Iron Dome and is now designing engineering systems for gunboats in the Pacific. And dealers make money, victims of imperialism die. With strong links to the military, it's hard to imagine that Microsoft, News Corp, and Warner Brothers Discovery would care as long as their stops go up too. Intelligent spooks and media moguls don't know what's best for people of the planet. It's time for a balanced and nuanced understanding of China. This begins with disarming the discourse, keeping the Pacific peaceful. So, this article is reviewing all the moves taken in recent years to prepare the way for war, with China. It's obvious that we have a big war party here. It's obvious, though the article doesn't really treat this, that many Congress people are members of the war party. People such as, for example, Senator Lindsey Graham. People such as Senator Menendez, of New Jersey, another big member of the war party.
I don't know why I'm not hearing.
Of course,
Oh, now I can hear.
the whole Republican Party in the House seems to be composed of people who are members of the war party.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of the Democratic Party, too. So,
Oh, definitely.
what effect would Dump the Corruption have had if it was a major movement in 2020 and 2022? Those Congress people that are beholden to big money from the defense industry would not be in Congress anymore.
And that's exactly what's needed.
That's exactly what's needed. With respect to not just heating up the war in China, but heating up war, in the Middle East. Of course, the military industrial complex is knee deep into that, even though that's bringing us to the brink, of nuclear war. We can see the scenarios right now. Would those people be in Congress if we had had a Dump the Corruption campaign that was strong in 2020 and 2022? My answer is no. In fact, someone like Nancy Pelosi wouldn't even have been reelected in 2022 if there was a Dump the Corruption campaign that was strong. Hakeem Jeffries would not have been elected if there was a Dump the Corruption campaign that was strong. And I could go down congressperson by congressperson and point out they would no longer be in Congress. It would be a wholly different Congress. It would be a Congress that would not be beholden to the military industrial complex. It would be a Congress that would not be bringing the existential threat of nuclear war to us. For the first time in 40 years, Joe Biden and the 117th and 118th Congress have been bringing us to the brink, of nuclear war. if we had had a strong dump the corruption movement in 2020, we would not be facing what we are facing today.
That's true. Very true. It's horrible just to think, we see every day what's happening in Gaza and we see the videos and we just see it every day. And there's people that profit from that. They go to sleep at night and I don't know, they just live their lives and profit from the harm they cause on other people's lives.
They're morally bankrupt.
They
Clearly,
are.
clearly, they have no conscience.
No.
Let's look at some comments. So Brandy expresses her lack of faith, in government. Okay, Steve goes to bed at about 9:35. Says, "Okay, I love you all." Brandy says good night at 10:04, and Dee tells her good night at 10:23
Yeah,
when
I saw it.
when she's already long gone.
Exactly. Ah,
Okay, so I think that's the end of this one. I do have a question for you, Dee.
sure.
Is this kind of model for dump the corruption shows? Okay, is this going to be really effective? Okay, or is this in the end just too boring?
I don't know. I don't know what the hell interests people. I really don't.
Okay, I'm going to try this again for next Wednesday's show and see how it works. For Friday, we have Christina Khalil. Okay, is going to be joining us. Okay, as you know, okay, she's a Green Party candidate for the Senate. Okay,
Mhm.
in Jersey, and she's working both with Madeline and with Shane.
Mhm.
Um, uh, okay, so I've agreed to interview her. Okay, on Friday, and I suspect that's going to be a fun interview.
Right. And people like interviews and stuff like that. You just don't know what really sparks people.
All right, I'm going to try this again next Wednesday with a new set of cases.
Right.
So we'll see what goes on at that point. Okay, tomorrow is a neoliberalism show, so
Right.
I'm going to
Tomorrow's Thursday. Okay.
I'm going to focus on neoliberalism for that show. Okay, so thanks for coming.
Oh, you're welcome. And I'll see you tomorrow.
Okay, and
Good night
uh,
to you.
okay, do you have any idea about what you'll be talking about tomorrow?
Uh, we'll just see what happens overnight and tomorrow.
Yeah, there's an awful lot that's going on, and most of it is terrible.
It is. It's just horrid. We earlier this year, we were covering and we were seeing all the stuff that was going on, and we wanted to cover other areas, but it just seemed like there was just so much going on with Israel Palestine that we always got brought back to there again. So I mean, if we saw the buildup, and it's just like, eh, it just seems everybody just ignored it, like it didn't matter.
Yes. Yes, but obviously it does because it's bringing us to the brink of nuclear war in that area.
Right. We just live in such a sick, functioning world. It's just it's maddening how it is. How.
Well, I think the good thing is that the Chinese and the Russians and the BRICS nations are trying to change that.
Yes, that's the positive
And they're trying to work through
situation.
the United Nations also to change it
Yes.
and to work under the dictates, of international law. And that would be very, very important if that was successful.
Oh, definitely.
And that is, I think, okay, a very hopeful sign.
Yes, and that's something we were saying all year long, that the hope was bricks. There was no other. Okay, well, I guess I will say good night and good night to Bonnie.
Okay, good night, Dee. Hey, Bonnie.
Bonnie, good night. We'll see you tomorrow.
Okay, good night, Dee.
Good night.
Thanks.